3.
We all know that the original 1987 directorial by Paul Verhoeven unquestionably created a classic sci-fi action film whose social satire has only gotten more relatable in the present times. Ideally, RoboCop should have been a single masterpiece, without any sequels, but it is what it is. They kept going. And while RoboCop 2 had its flaws, it still had some weight to it. Then came RoboCop 3, and that's where things really fell apart. The tone changed, the lead changed, and it felt like the people behind it fully understand what made the original work in the first place. Since the first film was both a commercial and critical success, Orion Pictures followed the steps any profit-making studio would. They decided to make sequels to the movie. Not just that, there was an entire market of video games, comic books, toys, and even a cartoon show aimed at younger audiences, who were otherwise barred from viewing this R-rated film. Yeah, remember hiding those rented RoboCop VHS tapes? Won't lie, sporting a RoboCop action figure was a big deal back then. But producing every imaginable toy, merchandise, and NES games over-fatigued the market, and RoboCop lost its original mature tones due to overexposure. At this point, it became a money-making machine. Think about the original fans who went into the theater and watched something as gory as a man dying in toxic waste, his body parts melting and blood splashing everywhere. How would they have felt with animated series like RoboCop and RoboCop Alpha Commando, where even bullets were replaced with laser weapons? Blinded by those little green papers, the studio already intended to work on 2 more films while releasing the second one, RoboCop 2, in 1990. This one managed to sail through, but by the third film things took a tragic turn. Orion Pictures had to declare bankruptcy, and RoboCop 3 became a part of their asset sale. I guess you can already connect the dots as to why there isn't a RoboCop 4, and where things were heading. By the third film, we had neither the writer from the last installment as the solo decision maker, nor the same RoboCop. Peter Weller was occupied with shooting for David Cronenberg's Naked Lunch, and though Frank Miller returned for RoboCop 3, his screenplay was handed over to another writer, Fred Dekker. Yes, the very one who directed masterpieces like The Monster Squad and Night of the Creeps. Dekker was now onboarded as both the co-writer and director of RoboCop 3. Though Dekker was a true fan of the genre, his creative choices were highly influenced by Orion Pictures' marketing strategy. RoboCop 3 was supposed to be the first one in the franchise to have a PG-13 rating. Now, what does that mean? Significant toning down of the vivid portrayal of blood and violence for which RoboCop had cultivated a niche fanbase. A movie which alienated longtime fans also came as a blow to Miller's writing. Dekker chose to scrap off the graphic and darker contents of his co-writer to fit studio expectations. The PG-13 decision was not a random call by the studio. Having already tasted losses in various ventures, Orion Pictures wanted to make as much money as possible from ticket sales, meaning it had to target their new fanbase, the younger audience who made RoboCop cartoon and merchandise a glorious success. Thus, in the midst of financial troubles, Dekker's ideas of a Hong Kong-style stunt team, Robo Ninja, and the gory action sequences had to be dialed down. This was partly due to budget restraints, and partly to attract youthful teenagers to the theaters. There wasn't any point in making a RoboCop movie if it cannot cater to the upcoming viewers. That's what the production company thought, but in reality, it was kiddie fan service and lost its older audiences. I mean, think about the ones who applauded the graphic depiction of Alex Murphy's death in the first movie. How would they have felt when a 10-year-old hacker, Nico, saved every last one in this film? As comical as it sounds, Dekker had to abide by studio demands and ended up making a RoboCop movie with RoboCop obsolete for most of it. Fans clearly missed having more of RoboCop, his signature one-liner dialogues, and the iconic action scenes. Making things worse was a replacement of Peter Weller. No offense to Gossip Girl fans, but Robert Berg was just not cut out to play Alex Murphy. I mean, he did a wonderful job with movies like Tombstone and Safe, but as the RoboCop, it seemed like he couldn't even move properly in the suit. While we can criticize Berg's portrayal as a scary movie spoof, the studio's lack of funding worsened his filming abilities. They couldn't even tailor-fit a suit for him. Poor Berg had to cram himself into Weller's suit, which even caused him a back injury. Moreover, They did not even use editing to make it look like Burke could manage the suit. He tried his best to mimic Weller's performance, working with the former mime's teacher, enduring the suit struggle, all of it. But Burke could not portray the one trait that made Weller the ultimate RoboCop: pain. And most importantly, could not wash Weller's stamp on the role. Also, do you really think the makers gave him enough space to evolve in the character? I believe no. Burke's interpretation of RoboCop had no such moment where you could feel drawn towards him. Remember the intense scene in the first movie where Alex visits the abandoned Murphy house and we get to see flashbacks of his son and wife? Well, Burke did not get to play any such sequences in RoboCop 3, and was mostly limited to play a dispassionate, stoic robot even during the death of his longtime partner, Lewis. You would think he would emote feelings of revenge, but nope, nothing. Honestly, I feel so sorry for both Decker and Burke's situation. As much as they failed to deliver a spectacle that RoboCop 3 ought to be, their hands were tied by the studio's whims, and we would never know how they would have performed under full creative freedom. As far as Peter Weller's decision of quitting the franchise goes, fans can't really blame him. From RoboCop 2 itself, creative differences surfaced between Weller and the makers, where the creator was reduced to a comic book hero. In an interview, Weller shared his disappointment about the second movie. While he wanted RoboCop to have a final face-off with Old Man of Omni Consumer Products, the corrupt conglomerate in the franchise, the production chose to ignore his ideas. Rather than going with a narratively appropriate showdown and expanding on the themes of the original film, they went ahead and introduced a new foe, drug dealer Kane. The suit was another issue for Weller. Though he pulled through, shooting in the fiberglass material for long hours had endless cons. Moreover, the high temperatures in Dallas made matters worse. Weller lost nearly 3 pounds a day from sweating and exhaustion, and even clashed with the director, Verhoeven. While these factors highly contributed to his exit from RoboCop 3 and the signing of the Cronenberg project, Weller had a more personal reason. Naked Lunch was not just a film for him. It was his homage to William S. Burroughs' sci-fi novel of the same name, of which Weller was a fan since the age of 18. Upon hearing about the adaptation, he rigorously chased and landed the role of William Lee, the Exterminator. With both the movies scheduled to film in 1991, Weller did not hesitate once to let go of his fiberglass misery. Coming to Orion Pictures' bankruptcy, it was indeed a misfortune, but the studio saw it happening. Despite hits like Silence of the Lambs and Dance with Wolves, which injected some momentary cash into the company, it was mostly under crushing debt owing to several box office failures and decisions like opening a television unit, which never brought in much profit. In the wake of such economic doom, Orion entered into agreement with Columbia Pictures Entertainment, and thankfully so. Under this deal, Columbia would distribute and release Orion's films overseas, and that's how we got RoboCop 3 arriving in the international markets way before it could hit the screens in the US. The movie was initially scheduled to release in 1992, since production ended within 3 months, from February to May that year. Ideally, that would have given Orion enough time for marketing and post-production, but sadly, all the insolvent company could manage to do was a delayed release in late 1993. Unfortunately, RoboCop 3 could not even redeem itself after its release. The story follows a Japanese takeover of the OCP, possibly because Miller was writing the DC Comics Ronin around the same time, and the corporation coming up with an evil scheme of building a Delta City by clearing the native population of Detroit, which has already been acquired by them due to extreme financial instability. For this task, the OCP has recruited urban rehabilitation officers, but unfortunately, these rehabs come off as laughable rather than being scary. Enter RoboCop, who helps the struggling locals go against his programming with the help of Lewis and clashes with ninja robots called Otomo, and even flies around like a 6-ton Superman using a jetpack in a much anticipated action scene. However, in spite of all the glitz and glamour, it failed to offer the intended cinematic experience. They did bring back parts of the first film, like Basil Polidoris' score, but even that got buried under everything else. The story was all over the place. Too many new characters, too many subplots. They even threw in a kid hacker to help save the day, which just made it feel even more off. The effects were fine, nothing special, nothing really pushed things forward, so the whole thing ended up looking older than the films that came before it. Oh, and I will never find a good reason as to why they had to kill off Nancy Allen's character, Lewis. Initially, the audience thought that she might come back as the new RoboCop, and honestly, that would have been such a save. But no, the creators did not even consider that. Think about it. Ann Lewis as the new RoboCop would not only have revived the franchise, but could have explored novel themes of gender and partnership back in the 90s, and that would have definitely made the RoboCop series a treasure for generations to come. It's no news that such a dull movie opened to a swarm of negative reviews. Critics pointed out how unimpressive the movie's story, tone, and production was, and claimed that RoboCop 3 was bluntly silly, with some even sarcastically saying that the makers could try making an evil version of RoboCop for the next part. The film has a rating of 9% on Rotten Tomatoes, where the consensus reads that this sequel should have been arrested rather than being screened. Even on Metacritic, it has an average reception with a mean score of 40 out of 100. That doesn't sound too bad, right? Well, sorry to disappoint you, but it was based on just 15 reviews. The subdued violence was a major point of criticism, and rightfully so. I mean, how would a Harry Potter movie without the flying broomsticks and dark magic spells feel? Or a Captain America film without the shield? That was RoboCop 3, without brutal action sequences and satirical comedy. The film lost its soul way back when Peter Weller walked out of it. The least it could have done was not be desperate to be a family-friendly movie and uphold the notorious storytelling style it was known for. Audiences have dubbed it as the worst sci-fi film, which brought about a shameful end to the trilogy and came up with funny but insulting nicknames, like RoboCrap. Nonetheless, Real Film Reviews went a little soft on the movie and gave it 2 stars. Reviewer David Nusser called it a popcorn movie once you can manage to sit through it. Interestingly enough, some see RoboCop 3 as an improvement over the last one. Viewers have appreciated how it revolves around Alex Murphy, unlike the second part, which was messier. Some even praised the action and portrayal of a decaying Detroit as realistic and called it a surprisingly good watch for carrying on the tonality of the first film in a much better way than RoboCop 2. While some call it an underrated classic and believe there are worse movies out there, RoboCop 3 fell flat at the box office, barely earning $10 million in the home country against a production budget of $22 million. However, the worldwide collection of nearly $47 million somehow salvaged some profit. Honestly, the fact that Orion even dared to compete with James Cameron and make anything remotely similar to Terminator 2, 1991, which is basically worshipped among fans, was a blasphemous decision. Marvelous verdict. So yeah, RoboCop 3 just did not work. It felt like no one really knew what made the first one so great, and instead of leaning into that, they went the complete opposite way. You come in expecting that raw, violent, satirical edge, and instead it's just dull. RoboCop barely feels like RoboCop, and honestly, the whole thing just kinda falls apart. There were a couple okay moments, sure, but most of it just feels off. And that PG-13 rating? Big mistake. This was never meant to be kid-friendly. Anyway, that's all for this one. If you haven't watched the original in a while, go rewatch the '87 version. Still hits hard. Catch you in the next video.